Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and we are back in the States. We made it 3 days of travel. We're in a hotel room, and I have been talking recently a lot about neurosensitivity and using parts work with it. And my hope is actually to eventually form a monthly kind of support group of people who are neurosensitive and who are using parts work. So several people have asked me, how do I know if I'm neurosensitive? And what does that even mean, right? Because it's not necessarily a term that's used a lot. I'll tell you why I really love it, though. Um, so what I wanted to do is make a video about what is neurosensitivity and am I neurosensitive? So I made a whole PowerPoint for you, and hopefully those questions will be answered by the time we are done here. So what is neurosensitivity and am I neurosensitive? Let's see. I think my image might be covering some things, but I'll go over what's here. So the definition of neurosensitivity is a temperamental or personality trait which is present in some individuals and reflects an increased sensitivity of the central nervous system and a deep cognitive processing of physical, social, and emotional stimuli. Okay, so it's basically a nervous system and brain that processes things on a really um, intricate level. And we'll talk about what percentage of the population is this. I'm going to make myself a little smaller so you can see here. This is just an image of the central nervous system, right? Which includes your brain and your spinal cord, including ganglia and nerves, essentially that go out to the rest of your body and the peripheral nervous system. So it affects your entire body, is controlled by your brain and your spinal cord, and it's also very connected, if you're familiar with polyvagal theory, with your vagus nerve and having just high sensitivity to produce uh, different states in your body and your nervous system. So let's keep going here. I'm going to keep myself small for a second because there's a lot to see kind of on this slide. But neurosensitivity is also known as sensory processing sensitivity, not to be confused with sensory processing disorder. Sensory processing sensitivity. This is the trait that is characterized by a tendency to pause to check in novel situations, greater sensitivity to subtle stimuli, and the engagement of deeper cognitive processing strategies for employing coping actions, all of which is driven by heightened emotional reactivity, both positive and negative. Okay, so this is kind of describing the ways that our system responds to being sensitive, right? So we will have parts who will be hypervigilant and pause to check because our bodies and brains experience things on a highly sensitive level. Um, and so we'll have deeper cognitive processing and coping actions and parts that might come in to protect because of that. So if you look here, you can kind of see again the nervous system and the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Let me see if I can I make myself even smaller? Ooh, okay. There we are. On the left here is the parasympathetic, on the right is the sympathetic. And this is just showing how the nervous system affects the whole body. It affects all the organs, it affects um your muscles and your nerves and everything from when you're in parasympathetic, right? Uh, it stimulates the flow of saliva, slows your heartbeat, constricts your bronchial, your breathing, stimulates peristalsis in your and secretion in your belly, stimulates the release of your bile, contracts your bladder. So these are really when we're kind of in rest and digest state, right? And our bodies are feeling safe. We will have normal heart rate, slower breathing, and our digestive system will be working. Um, and then this here, I think this is the vagus nerve. I don't know if this is meaning that this is the spine. I think this here is considered the vagus nerve, and it really goes all the way from kind of the base of your neck all the way down into your belly and your um uh that core, the core part of you. It even makes me think of the chakras, right? That are all affected. And then the sympathetic is when our nervous system perceives threat. And so, because we have a more highly sensitive nervous system, we may perceive threat where other people's systems don't. Doesn't mean it's not there. um, and so, our sympathetic part of our nervous system, which is our fight or flight, creates our pupils to start dilating and inhibits saliva flow, accelerates our heartbeat, dilates our bronchial tubes, or our breathing gets shallower and quicker, and then inhibits our digestion in all of these ways. Here, it might convert glycogen to glucose. It creates adrenaline and noradrenaline, might inhibit bladder control. So, when our nervous systems are activated because they're more highly sensitive, all these aspects of our body are going to, our muscles are going to tense, right? We're going to have digestive issues, perhaps breathing issues, heart issues, um, all kinds of autoimmune issues, right? Because it's like activated so much that there's this clear connection between being neurosensitive and our bodies kind of taking a toll in a sense. And we'll see why that happens in a second. Okay. So HSP, you might have heard of a highly sensitive person, right? Which was made popular by Elaine and Arthur Aaron. And HSP is just a human with a high measure of sensory processing sensitivity. So when we talk about neurosensitivity and we talk about sensory processing sensitivity, those are synonymous, and also synonymous with HSP because a highly sensitive person is simply a person who has sensory processing sensitivity or neurosensitivity. And I highly recommend, if you identify with this, reading the book Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron. And then I just wanted to share this slide on the right because I think it describes really well visually that there's an increased emotional reactivity and empathy. And then there's greater depth of information processing, and these kind of feed into each other, which leads to greater awareness of environmental subtleties and increased susceptibility to overstimulation. So, increased emotional sensitivity, greater depth of information processing, so then greater awareness of what's happening in the environment, which leads to uh, a higher susceptibility of overstimulation or stress. Okay, now I'm going to make myself bigger here, but I don't cover these beautiful elephants. So, how many people in the population are neurosensitive? The estimation is 15 to 20% of the human population has traits of neurosensitivity. And there's the same percentage of neurosensitivity in all animals. This has been observed scientifically in over 100 non-human species. So, neurosensitivity is not a disorder. It's an innate survival strategy that has both advantages and disadvantages. But it seems that evolutionarily speaking, that it's really important for about 1/5 or about 20% of the population to be neurosensitive because it protects the population as a whole to have a certain number of people who are attuned and aware of the dangers in the environment. And so this reminds me a lot of Glennon Doyle talking about the canary in the coal mine, right? And when men would go and mine in the coal mines, there would be fumes that were toxic, and they often could not smell them, but the bird, the canary, could. And actually, I think what would happen is the canary would go in and would die. And the canary was the one who told them there's something toxic here, even though they couldn't smell it. It would be toxic to them too. And so the highly sensitive people are the ones who have a really valuable message for the culture. Hey, this might be toxic. This might be too much over here because our systems tell us that before other people's systems do. So that's it. We are very valuable to the population as a whole. Okay, so the experience of being neurosensitive, you can see if you identify with this or not. People with sensory processing sensitivity report having a heightened response to stimuli such as pain, caffeine or other substances, hunger, loud noises, strong smells or tastes, uncomfortable textures, sensations inside the body, social rejection, all kinds of things. This deeper processing may result in increased reaction time as more time is spent responding to cues in the environment and might also contribute to cautious behavior and low risk taking. Okay. Because if we're aware of the risks in our environment, we are less likely to go forward in them. Whereas if someone is not aware of the risks, they they might more easily go forward. And again, there's no right or wrong with someone who's neurosensitive or not. Um, but if you are neurosensitive and you identify with this, and you can kind of look back over your life and see if this is true. So for me, it's very true. Um, I can feel pain inside my body, outside my body, hot, cold, um, itching, like different sensations in my body, I think to a greater degree than other people. I feel it more quickly or more intensely when I need to use the restroom. Um, I I don't drink any caffeine, even though I love coffee, because it gives me a heightened, like a very anxious, heightened panic feeling, which is I'm very conscious and aware of it, right, in my body. Maybe it gives that to other people and it's at a lower level, so they just feel awake, right? But I feel it on to a higher degree, which is uncomfortable for me. So I choose not to have caffeine. I also, with any kind of substance, even if it's a prescribed substance, right? Like medications that are prescribed, I will get every side effect. It's like my system is very susceptible. And so I'm become very aware of that. And so for my system, I choose to not take most substances that are prescribed to me, or perhaps to take half of it because I'm actually wearing my N equals one shirt today. So N equals one just means that the sample size of the experiment is one, is myself. Because even if 85% of people in the studies, this medication works successfully for them, I might be in the 15%. I might be in the 15% who have negative side effects. I remember taking Dayquil and it making me fall asleep, and NyQuil and it making me wired and awake. So I had the opposite reaction that the majority of people have. So it's just about observing myself and allowing myself to be different and saying, okay, um, this affects me this way. I choose to take it or not take it. Um, I think that pain meds also affect me to a higher degree. So they're like more effective in some ways. And then hunger, my body, if I don't eat at the time that my body is used to eating, I feel incredibly uncomfortable. I feel um, like dizzy, really agitated. It's very, very clear to my body when I watch people are like, oh yeah, I forgot to eat. I went all day without eating. I think, oh, that's just not possible. I can't do that. Um, Loud noises really affect me. Things like sirens, fireworks, popping balloons. It's always been terrible for me. Um, I have a really strong sense of smell, which again can be really helpful. A little while back when we were in the van, I just kept saying something smells, and Brian was like, I don't smell it. I don't know what you're talking about. I said, oh, I was sniffing everything in the van. What is it? What is it? What is it? And I finally found that the burner on the gas stove was on, and so it was gas that was coming into the house, and it was kind of like the canary in the coal mine. I was like, something smells really bad here. Our sense of smell being heightened is actually a really beneficial thing, because if we get a piece of meat or any kind of food and we smell it as bad, that's what tells us don't eat that, right? That's toxic. That's not good. So being able to smell is good, but it also, you know, can be uncomfortable for us because we often will smell bad things and feel uncomfortable from it. Again, that discomfort is a really helpful message. So we might also have taste issues or texture issues with food or with clothing. Um, I kind of talked about sensations in the body, like feeling things. And then a common thing is to have a rejection sensitivity socially, and to really, it's fascinating because again, we're going to talk about how neurosensitivity is really foundational to a lot of things like autism and um, ADHD and OCD and different things. This trait of neurosensitivity is underlying all of that. And it's funny because a lot of people on the outside, they perceive that, especially people on the autism spectrum, um, seem like they're unaffected or they don't have emotion. But it's actually that they are more affected by things, and sometimes they're trying so hard. So it's like kind of this polarization or pendulum swing, where because as a child they've been too much, they're trying so hard to be nothing and to not show emotion, um, or they have been really rejected, right? Their truth is that they've had a lot of rejection because they were seen as too needy or too much of this or that, that they were rejected. And so now they have a high sensitivity to being socially rejected and constantly being hypervigilant around what should I do? What shouldn't I do? Right. So it's all very, very connected. Um, and so, yeah, often people with high sensitivity are very cautious and low risk taking. So again, if you identify with a lot of these things, like you've been very sensitive to sensory stimuli most of your life and to emotional, social stimuli, you've processed things on a really deep level, you are cautious, a low risk taker, you are likely neurosensitive if you are identifying with this. So, the quote unquote negative traits of neurosensitivity are high stress levels, more susceptible to stress. This makes sense, right? Because if we're noting all the stressful things in the environment, we're going to feel more stressed. So, then more easily overwhelmed. And that then increases our rates of anxiety, depression, and sleep problems. But I'm going to say this a couple times here because I feel like this is really important. This is my theory, is that these quote unquote negative traits are actually a result of trying to suppress our authenticity, our genuine sensitivity, right? To mask in order to live in a world that is not designed for highly sensitive systems. So if and when a person begins to live authentically, to basically accept their natural sensitivity, and to set boundaries to care for their needs, they no longer will have high stress levels, get overwhelmed, feel anxious and depressed, or struggle with sleep. This requires, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a second. This really requires a lot of deep inner um, curiosity and listening. And because again, the parts that won't let us be authentic our authentically sensitive selves and support ourselves in the way we need to is because often they fear being socially rejected. And so when we live authentically, the parts who are sensitive to the social rejection can come up. So there really is this healing journey of loving and accepting who we are, ourselves, right? That if we can have that secure attachment on the inside between all the sensitive parts of ourselves and our capital S self, it can say, I accept you for who you are, even if the people outside can't, even if they don't understand why you're so upset by what you're smelling or by what you're feeling in your clothes, or they don't understand, um, just that your stress level is higher than theirs for a certain reason, and that you need to rest or you need to say no to this thing. Even if they don't understand, it's okay. I understand and I accept you and I'll support you. And when you have that inner support, then it becomes easier to withstand kind of the social rejection or social misunderstanding around it. Okay. The positive traits of neurosensitivity are many. They are increased plasticity. There's actually an increased ability to kind of move and flow, because we're constantly receiving information. And when we allow ourselves to be authentic, we can receive the information and move fluidly. Ah, no, not there, here. When we learn to really listen to our body compass. And our body kind of forces us to do that, or we'll shut down. So um, okay, the next one is increased responsiveness to both negative and positive experiences and emotions. So we are more highly sensitive to some of the quote unquote negative emotions. We might feel our sadness, our anger, our fear, and anxiety more deeply, but we also feel happiness and awe and joy and wonder and play more deeply. So there's a full experience. This is why I think a lot of people who are fours on the Enneagram uh, are neurosensitive people. There's an ability to really be in the highs and lows of the whole emotional spectrum. Um, and let's see, there's awareness of dangers in the environment. We talked about this, right? That in evolutionarily speaking, being aware of the dangers in the environment is really helpful. And we also tend to have increased empathy. We can feel how other people are feeling. We can really pick up on their energy more easily. There's more creativity because there's more access to just information inside and outside and wonder and play. And we often have more connection to our own intuition. And so I think people who are on the neurosensitive side actually it's easier for us to do inner work, to do parts work, and to relax and receive information from other parts because we're able to really be sensitive to the forms in which the parts are communicating with us, right? Whether it's a metaphor or an image or a sound or a sensation, we can detect that more easily. So I do think that people who are neurosensitive tend to be more spiritual, more connected to nature, to the divine, to other people, to intuition. So, like I was saying earlier, neurosensitivity is really this underlying foundational variable that underlies multiple other trait differences, such as autism or ADHD or OCD. So, a lot of people who experience those things are highly sensitive, and then that leads to what sometimes other people can perceive as a deficiency or a disorder. But it's really that there's a higher sensitivity. For example, in ADHD, there's a high sensitivity to what a person, uh, like I love the saying that the strength of ADHD is that someone with ADHD cannot like physically pay attention to something that's not authentic to them, that's not something that they really, really love and enjoy, right? And this is kind of true with autism as well, where if we have a special interest, we have all this energy and attention for it. And it's really difficult to pay attention to things that are essentially not our in our aligned with our values and our authenticity. And so our bodies begin to shut down if we uh, um I guess, adhere to cultural norms, right? And sometimes we can push ourselves and try really, really hard to, in schools, we have to focus on what we don't like. And then it takes a big toll on our bodies. And so we're actually more likely to come in alignment with our authenticity because our minds and bodies will break down if we don't, right? And so it's to me, that's a positive thing. Okay. So, yeah, there's this spectrum of sensitivity. And this is really the whole human race and all of animals fit on this spectrum. And there's from high uh, high sensitivity, right? High responsiveness to unresponsive or low sensitivity. So individuals with uh, sorry, I'm reading it, but it's not. There exists a spectrum of responsive, high sensitivity, and unresponsive, low sensitivity individuals with corresponding evolutionary costs and benefits. For example, individuals with low sensitivity, so people kind of the opposite of myself, or perhaps you, tend to take more risks and be sensation seeking. And they often have a higher percentage who represented in prisons, which is interesting, right? But their systems make sense too, because they don't feel things. They are taking risks and seeking more high sensations, right? Like I have this image of this guy hanging off the cliff. And when I showed it to my husband Brian, he was like, oh, that looks terrifying. I would never, ever, ever do that. Right. And so if you feel like that, you're probably a highly sensitive person, whereas a person with low sensitivity is basically seeking to feel things because they don't naturally feel them. We can feel a lot just from going outside and taking a walk and looking at nature, right? And a low sensitive person would probably see that as boring and not very engaging. So they're seeking it in in bigger ways, tend to take more risks, might disobey laws and things like that, and might have more firefighters. That's another uh, theory I have. Not that they have more firefighters. I think everyone has firefighters, but they might have more antisocial, might have more of a tendency to seek out activities that are more risk-taking, right? That tend to be antisocial, and then those things will put them in prison or have certain consequences in a negative way there. And the positive of being low sensitive is that they have less stress. They are just kind of going through life, not worried so much, or their bodies aren't responding as strongly to things. They're not perceived as quote unquote weak by the culture, things like that. Okay, neurosensitivity cannot be cured, and nor does it need to be. It cannot be cured with a drug. And it cannot be cured with punishment because this is a big way that culture tries to get rid of neurosensitivity is by punishing it. But suppression and overriding of our sensitivity by others or ourselves will only cause physical and mental illness because it just can't be gotten rid of. It's just an innate way that we are. We have innate needs and capacities, and if we don't honor them, it makes sense that our bodies are going to suffer, our minds are going to suffer. So, neurosensitivity is something to accept and even celebrate. And I'll tell you in a second about how my system has responded to this and why I'm so excited to talk about this to people because it's been so significant and currently it is been very freeing for my own system. For certain parts of me who spent their whole life suppressing and punishing and shaming and criticizing and lashing out at at parts who are sensitive of me, trying so desperately to change them, for them to realize, oh, this is not something we can change. Maybe we can just rest and accept it now, right? There's some grief for those parts in that they've been working so hard and they can't do it. Um, and they need comfort from myself and appreciation. But for them to realize this is something to accept and even celebrate has been revolutionary for my system. Okay, so here I say my experience a little bit. My parts have told me directly that their sensitivity is just who they are. It's not bad because other parts thought that the sensitivity was a burden, was basically something we need to unburden, we need to get rid of to be happy and healthy and free. But those parts who held the sensitivity explain, no, this is not a burden that I want to get rid of or I even can get rid of. This is just who I am, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Um, but the other parts who were trying to get rid of it, they developed their jobs due to trauma and conditioning, often from living in a sensitive body in a world who did not value this or even punished it. And so these parts developed their job to also try to suppress and punish and shame it and get it to go away, mask it, right? In order to survive socially. Things like they took on jobs like hypervigilance, people pleasing, constant inner critique, things like that. Just all the shoulds, you've got to do this, you got to do that, you should do this, you should do that. I was telling someone recently that many years ago, I became aware of the fact that I lived under the oppression of the shoulds, right? And basically, I just decided to observe one day how many times do I should on myself? Okay, so I just observed. It was not like I'm going to make myself stop. I'm just curious about it. And I counted that there were 80 to 100 times a day. You should do this, you should do this, you have to do that, you must do this, you must not do that, don't do this, you better not, you better do this. I just constantly all through the day, this was happening. I had parts who managed me to set like such a tight ship that I had almost no connection to what I authentically wanted to do, right? And what I started to do, the experiment that I did was to subtly shift it, that whenever I started to notice the shoulding voice, I would say, can we change it to could, right? Um, you should get up now. I could get up now. Do I want to get up now? If I don't want to get up now, why not? Can I get curious about it? Um, And again, just bringing that curious awareness, non-judgmental awareness toward it. And that was really huge for some of those parts. But they could not stop really until they began to understand that what they were trying to manage and change in me couldn't be changed. And that's when they finally started to relax more. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this, and again, I know this sounds like I just went in and I asked, and it was very clear. But this is a process, right, of really identifying. First, what I noticed was what I call murderous parts, like just hugely critical parts that were like, you need to die. And I started noticing when they would come up. Oh, they come up when I feel vulnerable, emotional, needy, a burden. Like they would say, you're such a burden. You're so pathetic. You're so weak. And so I realized, oh, they're pointing at parts who they see as very sensitive. And those parts would often appear as age 3, 4, 5, 6. And so that's kind of when these parts learned this is not okay. And we need to really harshly punish you, tell you you deserve to die if you're going to do that. Don't do it. Don't be sensitive, right? So then I started getting curious and going to the parts who were 3, 4, 5, 6 years old who held the sensitivity and saying, so tell me about your sensitivity. At first it was or these parts were trying, like I said, to unburden it, get rid of it. And then finally they said, no, this is just who we are. we can't get rid of it. And it's so fascinating because what they told me has really coincided with what I've learned later as I watch people who identify as autistic level 1 and I identify with everything in their experience and I'm like, oh, this is just who I've always been. And I go back to this person and I say, you're so right. This is just who you are. You told me that, you know. But it's really about helping all of these protective, masking, critical, people-pleasing, hypervigilant parts to understand, um, that. Really helping them has been key. Okay, I think this is the last slide. So this is basically my hypothesis that the trait of sensitivity, high sensitivity to internal and external stimuli is a natural trait of one system, is not something to be fixed. The parts who take on the stress, anxiety, depression, etc., and physical ailments as well, are responding to a culture that doesn't value our sensitivity. So the need to mask and override essential needs is what causes illness, both physical and mental. So a lot of these like negative aspects, my parts also explain this to me, that their trauma was from not being accepted or being shamed or punished for being who they were, either by just people who didn't understand it because they didn't experience it, or they were also taught to suppress their own emotions and needs and sensitivities, right? It's everywhere in culture. And so it could be parents, teachers, peers, right? And just being rejected and told that you're too sensitive, told you're weak, told you're a burden. So then you develop parts inside who do that and try to suppress your needs and capacities and authenticity. And then that eventually causes physical and mental breakdown. So I think a part of our big journey to health is returning to our authenticity and developing that internal secure attachment so that our young parts aren't grasping at other people to give that to us anymore and can allow us to be authentic and find the people who are safe and who do accept and support our authenticity. Okay, so the last one says, if a person can accept themselves as they are and honor their needs and emotions, for example, create boundaries, protect needs for space, for rest, time in nature, calm environments and relationships, etc., they will not experience the shame, anxiety, depression, um, that are seen as like part of neurosensitivity. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't think those things are naturally part of neurosensitivity. They just co-occur with it when we live in a culture and in relationships and environments that don't support us taking care of our needs. Um, and these are burdens that actually can be released. The parts who feel anxious about, well, how are people going to respond if I say that I need a nap in the middle, or I can't go to this social event and that social event, or I can't work a full-time job. I need to work from home. I need to um, wear noise canceling headphones. I need to wear a mask on the airplane. I need to just all the things that we know we're not trying to say everybody needs to do, but we want to do. And other people, I was talking to Brian about this. I'm going to stop sharing. I think that was the last slide. Yes. Um, so much of conflict and issues that happen socially in the world is because people think that because I'm like this, everybody has to be that like this. Otherwise, it invalidates how I am. Right? So people try to prescribe and put on other people what works for them. But what if every person was allowed to be different and to just take care of themselves and to respect each other? And like Mel Robbins says, just let them take care of themselves in the way that they want to without shaming or punishing them and understanding they may need that, I might not. Right. So I'm not going to make them not meet their needs. And likewise, if I have greater needs, I'm not going to make someone else uh, take a nap or wear noise canceling headphones or whatever if they don't need that, right? Letting each person really pay attention to their own system. If someone does have a need essentially for high sensation and in some kind of a safe environment, they want to race cars or go mountain climbing or whatever, I fully support them making that decision for themselves. And I would hope that they would support me not doing that. Now, that doesn't necessarily happen. A lot of people feel like if someone else is different than them, it threatens their sense of identity. That's why I think the solution really is for each one of us to accept ourselves. Because as we, help the parts that are so afraid and we show them that we accept our capitalist self accepts us as we are, then it's easier to take that risk socially. And again, might have to grieve certain relationships if other people can't accept the truth of us, right? But we can find people who do, who support us, maybe being different than them, taking care of our needs, and working creatively, especially when we're in a close relationship with partners, to say, what does it look like for me to take care of my need and set you free to not be held back if you don't want to, and to take care of your need? Brian's really wonderful about supporting me as having different needs than him, needing more rest, needing to use the restroom more, having more sensitivities to food, um, all kinds of things. And he's very wonderful about allowing me to take care of myself. I've more had to work with the parts of me who think he doesn't think I'm a burden or I'm too sensitive or pathetic. He's a very safe person. But because my parts early on had so many experiences with that, and then a 10-year abusive marriage where that was really, really reinforced, those parts are the ones that have had to be unburdened and updated, that not only does myself accept my innate sensitivity, so does my partner. And I'm going to be self-led and give a little bit of my truth to people and see if they can handle it. And if they can't, really grieve that and create some separation, but allow them to be themselves, right? So, all right. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions about what neurosensitivity or sensory processing sensitivity is, if you relate or identify to some, all, none of these things, and if you are realizing that you are neurosensitive, whether that means you might be on the autism spectrum. Oh, I want to say one thing about that. With the autism spectrum, what I realized is that underneath, because I used to think that level 1, 2, and 3 of autism were all so different that they should not all be called autism. But now what I understand is that underlying all of them is this high sensitivity, this neurosensitivity. All of them have that. And so the differences are just in the physical and cognitive capabilities on top of that. So some people who are level 3 and are nonverbal actually doesn't mean that because they're nonverbal that they don't have cognitive ability. They just don't have the physical ability to express their cognitive abilities. But they are neurosensitive. They have high intuition, high empathy, sensitivity to light, sound, which can create overwhelm and anxiety and things like that. That's all the same across the board, right? And so someone on this side of level 1 has more perhaps physical and cognitive ability to express themselves. And so they might be seen as more quote unquote normal and fit into society more, but then they have more of a capability actually to mask and to develop all of these parts that are hypervigilant and create anxiety and overwhelm and stress and really trying really hard to be quote unquote normal because there can be seen more that way, but they still have that underlying anxiety. And so they might be diagnosed with anxiety disorders, panic disorders, um, depression, OCD, um, a lot of physical things, like a lot of um I don't know, chronic fatigue, uh fibromyalgia, interstitial cystitis, like a lot of things where you're feeling a lot in your body, you're collapsing, you're fatigued, because your body is telling you you're not living appropriately for your level of sensitivity. You're trying to live in a quote unquote normal way, but your body can't handle that. And so I'm showing you this, right? So anyway, that's my take on kind of the spectrum there. And I yeah, please feel free to put any questions or comments in the comments section. And let's see, if you have listened this far, um, maybe put some things that have to do with sensory sensitivity. So it could be noises, textures, sights, sounds, tastes. And it could be something that your system goes, "Ugh, I really, really don't like that," or "Ooh, I really, really love that." Because again, our hypersensitivity allows us to like really detect our aversion response and our attraction response. Now, I was totally shut down to that for so long because I had all these parts working so hard to say, "You're a sinner, you're bad if you listen to your own body." But so it's not that I didn't feel it. I just thought I was bad for feeling it and other parts would override it. But I still felt it. I still had a highly sensitive system where I would feel very strongly my aversion response and I would feel very strongly my attraction response in my body. So yeah, put something in the comments that represents like either something you have aversion to or something like you really have an attraction response to. And let me know if you're interested in, if you identify with this, if you're interested in a monthly support group where we would just meet to talk about, to know that we're not alone and that this is normal and there's nothing to fix. And then to also really talk about what it looks like to be self-led in the world as a neurosensitive person. What does it look like to take care of our needs, to set boundaries so that we choose relationships, environments, um, uh, you know, physical things that we do or don't do, or things that support our nervous system. Like, how do we choose those things in our lives, and how do we work with the parts that block us from doing that? So that's what the support group would be based on. So let me know if you're interested in that, and I'll advertise it more when we're when I plan to start, which might be could be September, but more likely October. All right, everyone. I hope you're doing well, and I send you all love. Please be very, very kind to yourselves. Until we meet again.